As I said, in other words, make a plan. Make a plan of the thesis before you start writing. The thesis question and the thesis plan, which is supposed to be the topic of this, are for a review and for an experimental thesis. They differ a little bit. Yes, the question or review is called the objective or related term. There are several that covers it. In experimental thesis, it can also be called the thesis objective or question. Very often it's called the hypothesis. You notice that, I think, in a number of papers you read. The plan for the review, there are also different terms for it, often called an outline or draft thesis. For an experimental thesis, you need, before you start the work, not only the writing, in this case it's also the work, a research plan, which is basically an outline, but the requirements are different. I'll go into that more shortly, at least at the end of today. Now, starting with review objective. Yeah, it has several names. You can see here, aim, question, goal. In one or two sentences, completely and clearly state the goal of your thesis, and it's quite often helpful if you phrase it as a question. That's more of a linguistic trick, but it helps. It helps focus your search. That objective can then usually be divided into sub-questions that tell you what information you'll have to search for. These are the people questions. So remember these exercises we did during the search? That was also the initial question, and then subdividing it into the people questions. That's the same thing, really. I have trouble changing the slides because I have trouble with my mouse. Okay. The objective. Oh, sorry, Bob. Oh, hopefully you can follow. The objective really consists of two parts. The first one is stating the reason why you want to look at these things. That's usually your initial question, often a little bit general. And the second part, stating the exact things you want to look at. So the reason, first part, like I said, it's often a more general question you have. Very often, like the starting point of your thesis. Here's an example, maybe. Question is, well, can I just use zirconia implants instead of titanium implants? Can I do this in all cases? Always. Really? Are absolutely no drawbacks? And of course, there are associated questions like, yeah, let's see, I don't know, titanium works, doesn't it? Why should I change? Is there an advantage? If yes, what is the advantage? So you see, this is really kind of a comparatively general type of question. You can usually come up with questions like that. What this means, if you want to say it a bit more stricter, is you want to form your own evidence-based opinion. Evidence-based opinion, I mean by that is about the suitability of zirconia implants as replacement for titanium. Means the same as this question, just sounds a little more scientific. Now, once you have the general question, which, as I said, is usually the easier part to come by, you need to get part two, specific. What exactly am I going to look at? That's what I want to find out. Now, what do I need to look at? Means you need to narrow it down to parameter situations you want to look at. So if you want to know if zirconia implants are indeed just as good as the titanium ones, what facts do you have to know about to decide that? Again, please note, yes, the facts. The facts are what other people measure. The opinions is what the conclusions they drew from their measurements. You should definitely read the opinions and know them, but do never use only their opinions. They may be wrong, they may be slanted or whatever. Not just opinions, just the facts. Now, the problem is that is usually the point where things start to get tricky and work starts to be involved. Why is that the case? For this example, I can show you because usually you say, okay, what do I need to know to decide these implants are just as good as titanium implants? What are the potential differences? Best thing to do is sit down, make a list. read papers, what did other people measure and use, complete your list. And that list is not absolutely complete until I started for this mentioned comparison, zirconia titanium. Some are quite obvious. Yes, of course, the implant stability, long-term, short-term success, which is a little bit different. Degree of osseointegration, primary stability, secondary. Peri-implantitis, how is it for these two different materials? The plaque adhesion, Xenon probing. Now, what about the implant failure rate and the reasons for failure? Fracture resistance of the material might also cause failure. Stability of the material, failure rate. The biomechanics, how does the stress get transferred to bone? It might impact osseointegration and so on. The soft tissue reaction. So you can see there are multiple potential areas that if you want to make a complete coverage of the topic, you need to know about all of them. And in the end, you can say, okay, they are just as good here, better here, worse here, and in conclusion. Now that would be very nice and fine, but usually you don't have as much time. Yeah, so you can see it a bit. Also, these are just the outcome measures, the different ones. You might hopefully also remember that from the LICO question thing. In addition, what you should keep in mind that if you look at implant stability for titanium zirconia implant, keep in mind that there are other factors which are related to your initial question, but not identical. Maybe in this case, for this one would be things like implant size, shape, diameter. Obviously, that would influence the outcome, irrespective of whether it's titanium or zirconia, or influence the outcome measure you found. Same thing about patient situation, implant location, age of the patient, prior illness of the patient. Again, this might influence the outcome measure we look at. Now, you will never be able to subdivide it really as fine, but definitely keep these things in mind. Make it clear at the start what things can I look at, what else might influence my outcome parameter that is not directly related to the initial question, namely which material is better suited. Anyway, as you see, things add up, even for such an initially quite simple question, really. That means at this point, it's time to make a decision. Because in a thesis, especially in a very long thesis, we want to see, you will never cover all of that. It's better to cover a small area in detail as opposed to a large area and a little bit of everything. That means select a specific application or situation, and more importantly, and often easier to handle, select just a certain number of these outcome measures. Maybe just the bone-related ones, or the material-related ones, or peri-implantitis-related ones. So you can see it here. Usually you can group them. When you write them all down, you can group them and select a group and look at this group only. And if it's still too much, you can reduce it further. Anyway, this selection, this saying at which specific part that is covered by your question you'll be looking at, that's basically part 2 of your thesis aim. You got those 2 down, you should be able to work with it. Something else, often confused, where's the difference between the topic and the thesis objective? At the moment, I'm also getting suggestions for topics, and I keep telling people, send me the question, and they keep sending me the title, which quite often is not very helpful, because topic, that's the area you want to write in. Dental implants and periodontitis, for instance, that's a topic. Topics are general, vague, unprecise, too large. I told you, the key to your thesis is the question you ask, not the topic. So ask a question within this topic. That's what you have to do. So just rephrasing the title for the objective. Now, this means exactly the same as this, just in a few other words. Well, that's not the point. That's not going to help you at all. Don't do it. Instead, think about this question you ask. You have to read a bit to be able to get a good idea of the field and what is going on. Like I that before there's really no way around it. In that case, you might be able to see something like this. Yeah, long-term survival, patient's previous tooth loss to establish if there's an elevated risk, is an elevated loss of hard and soft tissue, and how implant success and survival are impacted. And in here, these two parts are there. The first one, what's the aim? What's really your initial question? What do you want to find out? The initial question was, do patients who have previously lost a tooth to periodontitis have, in consequence, a higher risk to again lose their implant, develop periimplantitis? That's the first question. And then you say, okay, if I want to find that out, what will I look at? Hard and soft tissue loss, implant success, development of periimplantitis. So you don't have to put this general part at the beginning. Doesn't really matter with 2 sentences. Sometimes that's difficult, but it has to be in there somewhere. What is it that I want to look at? And what am I going to look at to find it out? And that's really the thing you write about. Not this, but this. And as you know, as I've said several times, the objective, it's the key. Main organizing principle. At the start of your thesis, you ask a question. At the end of your thesis, when you answer it. And that, of course, means only stuff that belongs to the objective belongs in the thesis. True for every other type of publication, true because it expects something. That's another example, nothing to do with teeth in this case. Very, very general. Maybe 2 different types of dogs. Which is better? The new one or the old one? New green conventional or the conventional blue one? In some outlines, you'll see that later. There's a point that says background. Background means it's basically the start of the introduction later. But what it means is for you to think about why is this question important? What led up to this question? Yes, a bit of a rationale for your question. Maybe the blue ones have been used for a long time. Now we have the new green ones, and they have a nicer color, and they are very fluffy, and people are using them a lot now. But lately, there have been some issues regarding a higher loss of the green dogs. So now, for my thesis, I want to see if that is really true. Which one is better, the green one, blue one? So back to the objective. What exactly do I want to do? And if you think about the background and why you want to do it, it'll help you. Because again, yeah, rephrasing is not enough. Doesn't give any added information. Doesn't give you a key question to make. The problem is with, as I said, these general questions like, are the green ones better than the blue ones? Does periimplantitis, previous tooth loss, influence the success rate of implants later on? They're often a bit general. Like I said, it's easy to get to the general part. The more difficult part is narrowing it down into a workable thing. So usually, first try to phrase it as a question. Always helpful, because if you phrase it as a question, you already imply that there is the possibility to answer it. You can think about how to answer it. If it's a statement, that's a bit more difficult. Read, search the literature. What have other people found? What do you need? Get a better idea. And then, of course, how much do I find? Is it very much? Try to be more specific. Is it very little? Try to be less specific. And it's difficult to say that clearly how, because it always depends very, very much on the individual subject. But if you see about searching, you remember the search strategy which we talked about, and that can be used very, very nicely to actually figure out what exactly am I going to look at here. Because then you say green dogs, blue dogs, or conventional implants, zirconia implants, titanium implants, whatever you are looking at, see how much you find. Usually, such general terms, you find too much. And then people think about the PICO questions. We'll come there later again too. But like I said, these things are the process keep repeating themselves. So you can start with the things that I mentioned later here too. If it's too much, define your question. That's using the filters. I think we talked about it, just 10 years or just clinical studies. I don't recommend it very much, at least not at this point, because it won't help you decide if there are possibilities to write about it. Add outcome parameters. Add outcome parameters which you think might be helpful. The success rate, the loss rate, and you can find it by identifying it even more. Success rate plus success rate for what? Mobilization, complication. One thing, if you limit yourself to controlled clinical studies, we've said they're considered to be the best papers for the evidence-based medicine because they are the most controlled. The thing is, you cannot look at everything using controlled clinical studies. We covered that, I hope, at least I hope we did. For instance, if you want to look at complications, can you imagine a controlled clinical study that observes which complications can occur? Even if you could think of one, you would probably run into ethical problems. So basically things like that, for instance, are observational studies. Meaning, if you don't want a complication rate or more information about that, you will never find it here. But probably with another study type. That's one of the reasons why it's dangerous, limiting yourself to controlled studies only. Oh, it's backward. I hate this. Now, once you have an overview like this, you have a good idea of what is written in the paper, how much there is. It'll give you an idea of what to talk about. And based on that, as for the high-test thing, you can say, okay, what's the aim in this? I want to find out if the new green dogs are really a viable substitute for the blue dog breed. That's your general initial question. Now, how to do this? To this end, I want to look at the relative success rate, providing companionship, inducing mobilization. I want to check if there are breed-specific factors that are counterindicated, and to check that, the focus here will be dog loss in different situations. That means I have a general question and a specific area I want to look at. Try phrasing such things. It's a nice hobby. Now, that's your thesis question. That's already part of the outline. I just mentioned it first because it's really the most important part. You have to get right and straight first. If you don't really have this in hand, it's difficult to write. Now about the outline, just said it's a plan of the thesis. No? Better, more complete. The plan is before you start the writing process. The easier it will be for you to write. It's a plan, so it'll be short, few pages only, and it should contain what is listed here. Yes, the title, obviously, the rationale, background. It's not absolutely necessary, but can be quite helpful for you. Objective and research questions. We'll get to these later. Yes, definitely. The search history. How have you searched up to now? How much did you find? Yes, definitely. The provisionary structure of your results part. Now it sounds like I haven't written anything. How can I already write my index? Yes, definitely do it at the beginning, because that means you build the plan for the thesis. You just have to fill things out, and then you see what you need to write about. And of course, the list of the literature to be used in the thesis. So get to the detail moment. Like I said, yeah, it is really, really an important step, because before you start writing, yes, you clarify your goal. You think it through. How can I achieve my goal? You can make a plan how you want to achieve this goal. I do this first, this second, this next. And also very important, you can make certain that there is enough literature out there for you to actually answer the research questions. Meaning, plan first, write later. Always works. I keep getting the wrong button here. Now, outlines differ, depends sometimes what people want to see. You'll see different examples. What we'd like to see usually, and what will work in a general way, is an outline that contains these key points that were just mentioned: justification, objective, questions, strategy, and results. I've already talked, about the objective search strategy. We already covered in a previous lesson. List of literature. It's hard to find, but otherwise kind of obvious what's meant by this. So that leaves the research questions and the result structure. Talk about that a little bit. You'll remember this one. That's a slide which I already showed. Yeah, 1 or 2 sentences, helps phrase it as a question, and the important thing is this one, the objective can then be divided into sub-questions. These sub-questions, which should be typical questions, at least for several of them, these sub-questions are the research questions. Now, there's basically 3 different types of these research questions. Background. If you ask after background for zirconia and titanium, that might be what are the material properties of zirconia and titanium? What's what? One is a metal, one is a ceramic. What does this mean? What is known about it? Background. You can ask that as a research question. Then there are discussion questions, where really you ask questions which you will later answer in the discussion. Like, for instance, is zirconia really as good as titanium in specific situations, or just specific questions you'd like to discuss? Now, the most important questions, research questions, this one, number 2, foreground questions, data questions. These are the questions you phrase so you are able to search the literature to get the actual data for your results part. Now, if you're asked to write such questions, you can write background questions. You don't have to. You can write discussion questions. You don't have to. But you definitely have to write data questions. Maybe around 3 or something like that. These data questions, these are quite often summarized PICO questions. They're asking after concrete data which you will use in your results part. So, as an example, perhaps we don't have to read the pattern. This is the green dot example. Again, what might possible research questions be? These are examples for what they are not to be really. What is the best dot? That's an extremely vague and general question. Research question should be specific. Ask after specific information. So that won't work. Second one, green dogs, Dutch strain, children younger than 2. That's actually, it's a searchable question. The problem here is it's very specific. So you probably will not find enough data for it. That wouldn't be a problem if it hadn't been said these research questions should cover the 2, 3, or 4 most important points for your thesis. That is probably not, might be an interesting point, but it's definitely not the most important point. You will cover the most important ones. Last one, how does the presence of other pets influence dog behavior? If you read through the objective, never mentioned anywhere. So that's also common mistake, questions not covered by the objective. Only what's in here goes into the questions. Too vague, too specific, not covered by objective. So, what are viable questions? For the background, yeah, sure. What's the object you're comparing? Object of your comparison. What are the characteristics and common indications of 2 different implant types, 2 different dog types, 2 different surgical methods? Background. What does the reader have to know to really understand what you see later? Like I said, not a necessary question. But if you've never written something like that before, it sometimes helps if you write this out first. First, what background knowledge do I have to have? What has to appear in the thesis? Then, what's the exact data? Then, if you like, what will I discuss in the discussion? You can later always delete the other questions, since just delete the most important ones, but it will help you organize it in your mind. Yeah. Define basis of your analysis. Data questions, then you would go back and here say what are the outcome parameters I really wanted to look at. I wanted to look at the success rate for mobilization. And of course, I want to know if there are differences between dog breed and owner population. I want to know the loss rate. I want to know if there are other influencing factors. These are summarizations of PICO questions. We have that in the search lecture. And they should give you the results, the data which you will later use in your results part. Discussion questions, anything you would like to discuss based on this data later. Maybe if it's higher, can it be reduced? How can it be reduced? Counterindications, things that are of interest. Again, really important is the data question part. Searchable PICO questions, just a short reminder. You take this first one, what's the success rate regarding mobilization? Are there differences? You have the patient. If it's just patient, in the general, you can specify maybe it's an elderly patient or a handicapped patient. Green dogs, your intervention, your comparison would be the blue dog. Outcome in this case, the success rate of mobilization. So that's what I mean with these are summarized PICO questions because these are the individual ones. Yes, what's the success rate of mobilization of elderly patients with green dog compared to blue dog, with handicapped patients and so on. So these are both in there, but it's already very close to these searchable questions. Another example, if you remember this zirconia versus titanium implant, if you focus on bone-related outcome measure, then one of these questions could be what's the degree of bone implant contact in patients with zirconia implant compared to patients with titanium implant. And specify if necessary means depends on how much you find. These are things you just should keep in mind. Start with a more general part, but then look at it. If you have 10 papers giving you bone implant contact, look at what time points was it measured. Was it after 2 weeks, after 2 months, after 10 years? I know some of these don't make sense, but you see it's all bone implant contact for zirconia versus titanium, but depending on the time after which you found it, you will get different results. Yes, these can influence your outcome measure. Or maybe in patients, specify if necessary, is there influence by patient type? Just carefully read through the papers and see what type of patients they use, location, how comparable is it. Implant type, yes, it's zirconium and titanium, but what's the size of the implant, length, thickness? This might again influence bone implant contact. See what I mean? Just remember these things. Start general. If it's too much, use these modifiers to reduce. If not, keep them in mind when reading your data because it might tell you something. Results index. Yeah, it's the structure of your thesis, like a book. If you open it, it will give you an immediate idea what it is. And it has to look like this. Yes, with the numbers 5.1, 5.11, and so on. The titles should be either long enough so that they actually convey some information, or if they're very short, then add some text information so you know what you want to talk about in the chapter. That's really, you build the structure of your thesis. Yeah, that's just an example of what it should look like. Talking too much. And how do I write such a structure? Go back to your research questions. Basically, you need to get the information to answer these questions. That means this information has to appear somewhere in your text. That means your results index, the content of your results is based on these research questions. They all have to be answered in there. And then you can go in and look, what's my background question? What are the characteristics? Okay, chapter 1, different dog breeds and their characteristics. What? Right, next question, what's the success rate? Next chapter, therapeutic success of the different breeds. So for each question, you have to have at least one chapter that really answers it. Now, usually you can see these are just large chapters, no subchapters in there. You can see there are some gaps. Use subchapters just to give it more structure, to make it clearer what you want to say. Where this has absolutely no subchapters, that doesn't make sense, of course. But also don't use more than 4 levels. If it's just a, I don't know, 20, 30 page thesis, that also doesn't make sense. If it's a 120 page thesis, yes, but I sure hope you do not write 100 pages. So use subchapters. If you do, at least 2, otherwise you don't need any. Just a detail. So, and that means, that's just an example, here subchapters are added to the large ones. These are obvious, different characteristics for blue, for green, for